I need you to listen very carefully to what I am about to share because it may be the answer to the very questions you have been carrying in silence for years. I asked God a question that had been haunting me every night and following me through every prayer. I asked him why the ones who love him the most seem to struggle the hardest, why the faithful cry the loudest tears, and why the devoted often walk through valleys so deep that no sunlight seems to touch them. What I received in return was not the answer I expected. It was far greater. It was an answer that unraveled my confusion and brought me into a place of clarity I never thought I would reach. And today, I believe you were meant to hear it too. From the earliest moments of my journey, this question would not leave me alone. I looked at people around me, people who prayed with all their hearts, who served with joy, who sacrificed for the kingdom, and yet they lived with constant storms hanging over their lives. At the same time, others who never seemed to acknowledge God, who lived for themselves without any thought of heaven or eternity, appeared to walk through life with ease. They had wealth, they had influence, they had comfort, while those who gave everything to God seemed to live without rest. Maybe you have asked the same. Maybe you have whispered to God in the night and said, "Why me? Why is my path filled with pain while others live so carelessly?" You are not alone. This is a question that shakes even the strongest hearts. And I want you to stay with me through this because the answer I was given did not come in one moment. It came through a journey that mirrors your own. It began with letters from people who poured out their souls, mothers raising children while battling illness, pastors who stood for truth and lost everything, missionaries who gave their youth and returned home to broken marriages and broken hearts. They did not write to complain. They wrote because they wanted someone to understand their tears, and as I read their words, the same question kept pounding in my chest. If God loves his children, why do the most faithful suffer so deeply? I could not ignore the contradiction. It troubled my spirit and pressed upon my mind. I opened the scriptures and studied the lives of those who came before us. Abraham, who was told to leave everything familiar, Joseph, betrayed by his own blood and locked away in a prison cell for years, Moses, who exchanged the wealth of a palace for the cries of a wilderness, David, who was anointed but spent years hiding from death at the hands of Saul, the prophets who were rejected and mistreated. Even John the Baptist, called the greatest born of woman, was silenced by execution, and the apostles, those who walked with Jesus himself, did not receive lives of comfort. They received chains, exile, and martyrdom. Paul described his days as filled with danger, beatings, and shipwrecks. These were the chosen ones, yet their lives were marked by relentless hardship. So I asked again, if God has power to bless, to protect, to provide, why is it that his closest friends walk the hardest roads? Why is faithfulness answered with fire? Why is devotion met with difficulty? For a long time I carried these doubts quietly. I continued to speak of God's goodness while a storm raged inside of me. I knew that others looked to me for hope. I knew that if I opened my heart fully, some might stumble in their faith, so I held it back. I smiled while I questioned. I prayed while I wondered. But in the silence of my nights, the question never left. Then came the breaking point, my own season of testing. When I thought I was walking steady, the ground gave way beneath my feet. Finances collapsed, relationships fractured, health wavered. Every area of life that I thought was strong began to tremble, and the weight of it all drove me to my knees. I looked in the mirror, and I did not recognize myself. I was trying to carry peace for others while my own heart was in pieces. And I finally told God what I had been holding back for years. I said, Lord, I cannot go on like this. I cannot speak of your love while I secretly wonder if it is real. I cannot pretend that I understand when I do not. I need you to show me why the ones who love you most seem to suffer the most. Because if I do not understand, I cannot go forward. I prayed with more honesty than ever before. I poured out every fear, every doubt, every wound. I asked him to change my circumstances or change my understanding. I asked him to show me truth, even if it was not what I wanted to hear. And what followed was not a dream. It was not imagination. It was an encounter that shifted the entire foundation of how I see suffering. I found myself in a place that words can barely describe, a place of peace so deep that every wound within me began to close. Light filled the air, gentle yet strong, warm yet holy, a fragrance of flowers, a sound of water, an embrace of safety. And then I saw him, Jesus himself, walking toward me with eyes that carried both sorrow and joy, understanding and love. And before I could speak, he told me something that left me silent. He said, You have been asking the right question, but looking for the wrong answer. I did not understand, but I knew he was about to speak what I had been longing to hear. He explained that struggle is not the absence of his presence. Struggle is often the proof of it. Pain is not the mark of his anger. Pain is often the tool of his preparation. The question is not why chosen ones struggle more. The question is why he chooses strugglers to become his chosen. That sentence pierced me. I realized I had been seeing everything backwards. I thought pain was a sign of being forgotten. He said it was a sign of being trusted. I thought hardship meant punishment. He said it meant preparation. He looked at me with compassion and explained that he does not choose people because they are strong. He chooses those who are willing to be weak so that his strength can be revealed through them. I want you to pause and hear this for yourself. If you are in the middle of a storm, it is not evidence that God has abandoned you. It may be evidence that he trusts you with something greater. You may feel broken, but he is building something eternal through your brokenness. You may feel pressed on every side, but he is shaping something precious. He told me, nothing beautiful is created without pressure. Nothing valuable is formed without fire. Nothing eternal is revealed without surrender. And at that moment, I realized something that began to change me from within. The letters I had read from those suffering believers were not stories of defeat. They were testimonies of training. The lives of Abraham, Joseph, Moses, David, the prophets, the apostles were not tales of tragedy. They were blueprints of preparation. My own struggles were not accidents. They were assignments. He made me see that an easy life is not always a blessed life. Comfort can be more dangerous than pain. Ease can create spiritual weakness while trials create strength. The world measures blessing by wealth and health, but heaven measures blessing by growth and faith. And then he said words that still echo in my heart. I am not punishing my chosen ones with struggle. I am preparing them through struggle. I am not forgetting them in hardship. I am forming them in hardship. Their tears are not wasted. Their battles are not meaningless. Their faith under fire is the miracle the world needs to see. When I heard this, I wept, because everything I thought was failure was actually formation. Everything I thought was rejection was actually redirection. Everything I thought was loss was actually laying the foundation for gain I could not yet see. And I believe the same is true for you. Stay with me through this message, because what I am about to share will uncover truths that can turn your pain into purpose. Do not leave now. You have carried questions long enough. You have waited for answers long enough. And I promise you, what you will hear as we continue is going to bring light into your night. If you are watching this right now and you feel like you are carrying a weight you cannot explain, let me know in the comments where you are listening from. I want you to understand that you are not alone in this journey. I read your stories, I feel your pain. And most importantly, God sees it all. This is only the beginning. What I received was not just an answer, but a revelation divided into sacred truths that explain why chosen ones suffer and what those struggles truly mean. And as we go forward together, each truth will unfold like a doorway into hope. So open your heart, stay close, because the very reason you clicked this message might be that God wanted to whisper to you through these words. When Jesus spoke those words, I felt my entire perspective shifting. But he did not stop there. He told me that what I was about to receive were not casual answers. They were sacred truths. Truths that are hidden in plain sight, but only revealed when the heart is desperate enough to ask and humble enough to listen. He said these truths explain why his chosen ones walk through valleys others never see, and why their struggles are not evidence of abandonment but preparation for glory. The first sacred truth he shared with me was about pressure. He said, I use pressure to create precious stones. I stood silent, trying to understand. Then he explained, you know how diamonds are formed. They are not made in places of comfort. They are not created in shallow soil or on open ground. They are born deep beneath the surface, in hidden places, under extreme pressure. The very thing that could destroy is the thing that gives them their value. Without the pressure, there is no diamond. Without the fire, there is no brilliance. My children are the same. The pressure they face is not sent to crush them. It is sent to shape them. And then he asked me, have you ever looked at someone's life and admired their faith, their patience, their love? Do you think those qualities grew in ease, or do you think they were forged under weight that others would not carry? At that moment, faces began to pass through my mind. Sarah, the mother who taught children while battling illness. Michael, the pastor who lost his home and his position but held on to integrity. Maria, the missionary who returned to brokenness but chose forgiveness. I had once pitied them. But now I saw them differently. They were diamonds being pressed, refined, prepared. Their tears were watering the soil of their testimony. Their pressure was the very proof of their preciousness. Jesus continued, "Pressure is not a punishment, it is a privilege. I only allow it for those who carry potential for greatness. The more precious the calling, the more intense the pressure. Do not mistake weight for wrath. It is the hand of the sculptor creating beauty where the world only sees burden." I could not deny it. Every story in Scripture confirmed it. Joseph in the prison, Moses in the wilderness, David in the caves, the prophets in rejection, Paul in chains. The pressure did not destroy them, it defined them. Their greatest songs, their deepest wisdom, their strongest testimonies were born in seasons where pressure was heaviest. And I realized something about my own life. The pressures that had nearly broken me were actually shaping me into someone I could not have become without them. The confusion, the tears, the nights of silence, the crushing weight of unanswered prayers, they were not accidents, they were assignments. They were creating something eternal. I want you to hear this clearly. If you are under pressure right now, it is not because God has abandoned you. It may be because heaven has trusted you. You are not being destroyed, you are being designed. What feels like the end is often the beginning of something greater. Jesus then gave me an image that I will never forget. He showed me a lump of coal in the palm of his hand. Dark, ordinary, overlooked. And then he closed his hand around it. The pressure mounted, the heat rose, and slowly, as he opened his hand again, I saw the coal transformed into a diamond that reflected light with brilliance. He looked at me and said, "This is what I am doing with my chosen ones. They think they are being crushed, but they are being created." Tears filled my eyes because I knew this was not just for me, it was for you. You may feel like coal, unseen and under unbearable weight, but in his hands that pressure is turning you into something that will shine forever. I told him, "Lord, this makes sense for others, but why does it feel so painful when we are the ones living it?" And he answered with tenderness, "Because transformation is never painless, but it is always purposeful, and I never allow pressure beyond what I know can produce beauty. Every moment of wait is measured. Every second of fire is timed. Nothing is wasted. Not one tear, not one sigh, not one cry. They are all part of the process." As he spoke, I began to see my own seasons of pressure differently. Times when I thought God had turned away were actually moments he was closest, applying the weight that would draw out hidden strength. Times when I begged him to remove the fire were times he was increasing my brilliance. I realized I had been praying for him to take away the very thing that was making me who I was meant to be. And maybe you have prayed the same. Maybe you have asked God to remove the pressure, to silence the storm, to ease the weight. But what if that weight is the tool of your destiny? What if that fire is the birthplace of your future? What if your greatest testimony is being written in the very chapter you want to erase? He told me, "Do not fear the pressure, fear a life without it. For without pressure there is no growth. Without growth there is no transformation, and without transformation there is no testimony of my power." At that moment, I felt something break inside me. The fear of pressure left. I realized that every weight I had been cursing was actually the very sign that God was working, and I began to thank him, even for the seasons that once brought me to tears. Now I want you to think of your own story. Think of the places in your life where pressure is greatest, the relationships that feel heavy, the finances that feel unbearable, the health battles that never seem to end, the loneliness that feels suffocating. Instead of asking why, what if you asked what? What is God creating in me through this? What is he forming that I cannot yet see? The first sacred truth is clear. Pressure creates preciousness. You are not buried by the weight, you are being raised into something rare. As Jesus shared this with me, I felt my heart opening to a new understanding. But he was not finished. He told me that pressure is only the beginning. There are other sacred truths that explain the mystery of chosen suffering. And the second truth, he said, is about resistance. He looked at me with eyes full of compassion and strength and said, "I use resistance to create strength." When he said that, I knew we were about to step deeper into the mystery. And what he revealed next took me even further into the heart of why chosen ones endure what others cannot. So stay with me, because the next truth will change how you see every obstacle standing in your path. As Jesus looked into my eyes, his words settled in my spirit with undeniable weight. I use resistance to create strength. He told me that just as pressure produces preciousness, resistance produces resilience. He explained, every muscle in your body grows only by resisting weight. If you never pick up resistance, if you never push against force, your muscles weaken and waste away. It is the same with your spirit. Faith without resistance does not grow. Love without opposition does not deepen. Hope without trials does not endure. I realized that so many times in my life, I had prayed for God to remove every obstacle, when in truth those very obstacles were building the faith I would later depend on. Every resistance I faced had been a form of training. Jesus continued, "Do you admire the saints who walked before you, who stood with unshakable conviction, who sang songs in prison cells, who blessed even while they were beaten? Do you believe that kind of strength comes from ease? No, it comes from resistance. Their faith became unshakable because it was shaken. Their love became unbreakable because it was tested. Their hope became eternal because it endured delay and disappointment." I began to see that the giants of faith were not born strong. They became strong because resistance forced them to rely on God in ways they never would have chosen. Abraham resisted the fear of barrenness. Joseph resisted the temptation of despair. Moses resisted the cries of a nation. David resisted the weight of exile, and Jesus himself resisted temptation, humiliation, rejection, and the cross. Then Jesus asked me a question that pierced my heart. Would you rather have a fragile faith that collapses at the first sign of wind, or a faith that can stand against storms because it has been tested by them? I knew the answer, though my flesh still wanted comfort. He explained, "I allow resistance not because I enjoy your struggle, but because I know what it produces. Just as a tree sinks deeper roots when winds push against it, your soul grows deeper roots when life pushes against you. Resistance does not weaken you, it establishes you." As he spoke, I remembered countless seasons of resistance in my own journey. Times when doors were slammed in my face, times when people misunderstood or rejected me, times when progress seemed blocked at every turn. I had once thought those were signs of failure. Now I realized they were the very resistance that was strengthening me to carry what was coming. He said, "Do not despise resistance. Welcome it as a gift. For when you resist despair and choose hope, your hope grows. When you resist bitterness and choose forgiveness, your love grows. When you resist fear and choose faith, your faith grows. These are spiritual muscles, and they can only be strengthened by use." I thought of Sarah, still teaching children, while her body resisted her with illness. I thought of Michael, still holding truth while the world resisted him with loss. I thought of Maria, still forgiving when her heart resisted her with pain. Their strength was not natural, it was divine, it was the fruit of resistance. And perhaps you know this as well. Perhaps you have wondered why life feels like it pushes against you at every turn, why doors close, why people betray, why circumstances seem to block your every step. Could it be that God is not abandoning you but strengthening you? Could it be that what feels like resistance is actually training for the calling that waits ahead? Jesus looked at me again and said, "Resistance builds strength. But there is another mystery. Sometimes strength alone is not enough. Sometimes something must break before it can break through." I felt a shiver go through me because I knew he was leading me into the third sacred truth. He said, "I use brokenness to create breakthrough." I wanted to resist the thought. Brokenness has always felt like defeat, but he explained it differently. Every breakthrough in history has required something to break. The ground must break open for a seed to grow. The cocoon must break for the butterfly to emerge. The alabaster jar had to be broken for the fragrance to fill the room. My own body was broken for salvation to break into the world. What looks like destruction is often the doorway to deliverance. I closed my eyes as his words sank deep. I remembered times in my life when everything seemed to shatter. Dreams I had built crumbled, relationships I trusted dissolved, plans I held tightly fell apart. In those seasons, I only saw loss, but looking back, those were the very seasons that opened doors I never would have imagined. He told me, "When you are broken, the shell of self-reliance cracks open and my strength flows in. When your pride breaks, humility enters. When your plans break, my purpose emerges. Brokenness is not the end, it is the beginning of something new." And then he reminded me of Peter, the man who swore he would never deny him, yet denied him 3 times. That night Peter was broken, his confidence shattered, his strength proved hollow. But in that very breaking, Peter was prepared to become the rock upon which the church would be built. His tears of failure watered the soil of his future faith. His brokenness birthed his breakthrough. Jesus looked at me with compassion and said, "Do not fear being broken. Fear being unchanged. for the places where you are broken are the very places where my light shines brightest. Broken bones heal stronger. Broken hearts beat deeper. Broken vessels pour out more freely. I thought of Maria again. Her marriage broken, her family fractured. Yet out of that brokenness came forgiveness so pure it could heal generations. I thought of Michael, stripped of his role, but in his brokenness his integrity shone brighter than ever. I thought of Sarah, her body broken by sickness, but her spirit unbroken, teaching children the love of God with more authority than a healthy body ever could. Maybe you too know this kind of breaking. Maybe your life feels like pieces scattered on the ground. But what if those pieces are not the end? What if they are the very material God will use to build something new? What if your brokenness is the womb of your breakthrough? He told me, every ending you fear is often the beginning I have prepared. What you call a loss, I call a seed, and unless the seed falls into the ground and dies, it remains alone. But when it breaks, it brings forth much fruit. Do not despise your breaking. It is holy ground. As he said this, tears streamed down my face. I began to see my broken seasons differently. Not as wasted years, but as wombs of new life. Not as scars of failure, but as marks of formation. Not as empty endings, but as sacred beginnings. And Jesus was not finished. He told me that just as pressure creates preciousness and resistance creates strength and brokenness creates breakthrough, there is yet another truth. He said, I use desert seasons to create dependency. The moment he spoke those words, I knew we were about to enter a revelation that would explain why loneliness, dryness, and silence often follow the most faithful hearts. So stay with me, because the fourth sacred truth will reveal why your wilderness is not wasted and why your emptiness may be the very place God fills with his presence. When Jesus spoke the words, I use desert seasons to create dependency, I felt both a sting and a comfort at the same time. The sting came from memory, because I knew what it was like to walk through deserts where everything felt empty. The comfort came from his presence, because now I was beginning to understand what those deserts meant. He explained, in the seasons of comfort, you can easily forget how much you need me. When water flows freely, you rarely search for the spring. When bread is on every table, you rarely pray for daily bread. When life feels secure, you rarely realize that I am the true security. So I sometimes allow my chosen ones to walk into deserts not to punish them, but to teach them that I alone am their source. I thought back to the wilderness of Israel, 40 years of walking in dry lands, no fields to harvest, no wells to draw from. Every day they had to wait for manna. Every day they had to trust water would flow from a rock. The desert was not a punishment, it was a lesson in dependence. Jesus looked at me and said, the desert strips away what you thought you could not live without, until you see that I am the one thing you cannot live without. The desert reveals what truly sustains you. I remembered my own deserts, seasons when prayers seemed unanswered, seasons when friends were silent, seasons when no opportunity appeared. At the time I thought those were wasted years. Now I saw them differently. In those deserts I learned to listen to his voice more carefully. I learned to feed on his word like bread. I learned to drink from his presence like water. Those deserts taught me what abundance never could. Perhaps you know this as well. Perhaps you are in a desert right now feeling empty, unseen, forgotten. But hear me. Your desert is not wasted. It is the very classroom where God is teaching you intimacy. It is the very place where you discover his provision is not an idea. It is a reality. He is not distant. He is closer than your thirst. He is nearer than your hunger. Jesus continued, the people who leave deserts with their faith intact are different people than when they entered. They become voices that carry authority. They can tell others, I have seen the Lord provide when nothing was left. I have heard his whisper in the silence. I have found his shade in the heat. I know him, not because of abundance, but because of emptiness filled by his presence. And then he said something that burned in my heart. Do not despise your deserts. They are the very places where intimacy is born. They are not barren. They are holy ground. I realized that the desert had been the backdrop of every great calling. Moses met God in a desert bush that burned with holy fire. Elijah heard God's whisper not on a mountain of noise, but in the stillness after the storm. John the Baptist prepared the way for the Lord in a desert. Even Jesus himself spent 40 days in a desert before he began his ministry. Deserts are not detours, they are designs. Then he turned my eyes to the next truth. I use isolation to create intimacy. I felt the weight of those words, because isolation has always felt like rejection. But he explained it differently. He said, "There are times when I allow my children to walk alone, not because I have left them, but because I want them to discover how close I truly am. In crowds, you can miss my voice. In noise, you can forget my whisper. In the presence of many, you can rely on others. But in the silence of isolation, you find me. And when you find me there, you realize I was never far." I thought of the prophets, often alone, carrying words that no one wanted to hear. I thought of David, alone with sheep, before he faced Goliath. I thought of John, on the island of Patmos, alone, yet receiving the revelation of heaven. Their isolation was not abandonment, it was an invitation. Jesus looked at me with tenderness and said, "Sometimes I remove the voices around you so that you can recognize mine. Sometimes I close doors of human comfort so that you can discover my companionship. Sometimes I strip away support so that you can learn that I am the support that never fails." I began to think of moments in my life when I felt most alone, times when friends turned away, times when I felt misunderstood, times when my prayers seemed to echo back without answer. Yet in those moments, I had felt a strange closeness, as if God's presence pressed in deeper than ever before. At the time, I only felt the loneliness. Now I understood that He was building intimacy. Perhaps you know this too. Perhaps you have been walking through loneliness and wondering why God has not sent someone to fill the void. But what if the loneliness is not proof of absence, but proof of His invitation? What if He wants to meet you there in ways no human presence ever could? He said, "Do not fear isolation. It is not a wall, it is a doorway into deeper communion with me." And then He gave me an image. I saw a bride preparing for her wedding. Before she walks down the aisle, she is alone, hidden from the crowd, preparing herself to meet the one she loves. That time of solitude is sacred. Jesus said, "So it is with my chosen ones. I allow them solitude not because I do not want them seen, but because I am preparing them to be revealed. Their time of isolation is sacred preparation." Tears filled my eyes because I began to see how often I had mistaken His invitation for rejection. How often I had thought He was far, when in truth He was closer than ever. He told me, "The chosen ones who learn intimacy in isolation carry a fragrance that never fades. They walk with an awareness of my presence that nothing can take away. And when they return to the crowd, they bring with them a weight of glory that transforms everyone around them." I felt the truth of it in my own spirit, and I knew many who would hear this message were living in that very season. Some listening even now are in deserts that feel endless, in isolations that feel unbearable. But hear me, you are not being punished, you are being prepared, you are not forgotten, you are being formed, you are not abandoned, you are being invited into the closest companionship you have ever known. Jesus then said, "There is yet another truth. Just as I used deserts to create dependency and isolation to create intimacy, I also use waiting to create wisdom." The moment He spoke those words, my heart both resisted and longed for what was coming, because waiting has always been one of the hardest lessons. Yet, He was about to show me why delays are not denials, and why time itself is one of His greatest teachers. So stay with me, because the fifth truth will reveal why your waiting is not wasted and why patience is the soil where wisdom grows. When Jesus said, "I use waiting to create wisdom," I felt the weight of His words settle deep within me. I thought of the countless times I had begged Him to move faster, to answer sooner, to open doors immediately. I remembered prayers prayed through tears, asking why He delayed. Now He was showing me that waiting itself is a tool of love. He explained, "Everything worthwhile carries a timing, and timing cannot be rushed without destroying what I am creating. A fruit plucked before it ripens is bitter. A child born before the time suffers. A season entered too soon becomes a burden rather than a blessing. Waiting is not wasted time. Waiting is shaping time." I asked Him, "But Lord, why does it feel so hard? Why does waiting feel like silence?" He answered with tenderness, "Because waiting tests trust. Anyone can believe when answers come quickly. True faith is proven when time stretches long and you still cling to me. Wisdom is not formed in abundance. Wisdom is formed in the slow fire of waiting." I began to see the stories of Scripture differently. Abraham waiting for the promised son, Joseph waiting in prison, David waiting to sit on the throne after being anointed, Anna the prophetess waiting decades in the temple to see the Messiah. None of their waiting was wasted. Every moment was carving wisdom into their hearts. Every delay was preparing them for the fullness of promise. He continued, during waiting, people learn lessons they could not learn otherwise. They learn that my delays are not my denials. They learn that hope is not based on circumstances, but on my character. They learn to rest in my sovereignty instead of wrestling for control. These are treasures that only waiting can teach. I thought of my own waiting seasons, years where prayers seemed unanswered, years where opportunities seemed locked, years where silence echoed louder than words. At the time, I thought those were wasted years. Now I saw that those very seasons had been carving patience into me, teaching me reliance, giving me wisdom I could not gain any other way. Perhaps you are in such a season. Perhaps you have been waiting for healing, waiting for reconciliation, waiting for provision, waiting for direction. And perhaps the waiting has worn you down. Hear this. Your waiting is not empty. It is producing wisdom. It is preparing you for the promise. It is aligning you with timing that is perfect. Jesus then said, I could give people what they ask for the moment they ask, but that would rob them of the deeper treasure. What they receive too quickly, they often do not value. What they wait for, they hold with reverence. Waiting enlarges the heart to receive the blessing fully. As he spoke, I felt my resistance to waiting begin to soften. I realized that God's timing had always been flawless, even when I thought it was late. I could look back and see that the very things I once begged for, if given too soon, would have harmed me. His delays had saved me more than his immediate answers. Then he turned my eyes to the final sacred truth. He said, I use your testimony to create transformation in others. These words shook me, because suddenly everything connected. Pressure had produced preciousness. Resistance had produced strength. Brokenness had produced breakthrough. Deserts had produced dependency. Isolation had produced intimacy. Waiting had produced wisdom. But what was the point of all this? Why allow chosen ones to be refined so deeply? His answer came with such clarity. Because your life is not only about you. Your story is a seed for others. Your testimony carries power that theory never can. A person who has never suffered can speak about hope, but a person who has suffered and endured can impart hope. A person who has never been broken can speak of healing, but a person who has been broken and restored can release healing. Testimonies carry authority because they are born in fire. I thought of the letters I had read, the mother teaching children while fighting illness, the pastor holding truth while stripped of his role, the missionary choosing forgiveness in family pain. Their testimonies were not private. They were torches lighting the way for others who would walk the same dark paths. Jesus told me, theory informs the mind, testimony transforms the heart. I need my chosen ones to carry testimonies, because when they speak, they are not speaking ideas, they are speaking lived reality, and their lived reality reveals my faithfulness to a watching world. I could see it now. The lives of Sarah, Michael, and Maria were not just their own. Their battles were creating testimonies that would lift countless others. Sarah's perseverance in sickness was teaching faith to children who would carry it for life. Michael's integrity in loss was shaping generations who would stand for truth. Maria's forgiveness in betrayal was offering hope to families who thought reconciliation impossible. Their pain was not only for them, it was for all who would hear their story. And then Jesus looked at me with eyes that carried both fire and gentleness. He said, "This is why I trust my chosen ones with harder assignments, because I know their testimonies will transform others. They are not victims. They are vessels. They are not punished. They are prepared. They are not forgotten. They are favored to carry light into darkness." At that moment, everything I had wrestled with for years finally came together. The sacred truths were not abstract teachings. They were the framework of every chosen life. Pressure, resistance, brokenness, deserts, isolation, waiting, and testimony were not accidents. They were patterns of preparation. I realized that my own struggles had been shaping a testimony I did not yet see. The confusion I carried was now compassion for others. The questions I held were now answers for those still wrestling. The very pain I thought disqualified me had become the very authority I carried. And so it is with you. Your struggles are not only about you, they are seeds of testimony. They will become stories that break chains for others. They will become light for those in darkness. They will become bread for the hungry and water for the thirsty. But Jesus was not finished. He told me that everything he had revealed was leading to one final revelation, a truth that ties all others together, a truth that shows why chosen ones struggle the most. He said, "You need to see how I see them, not as broken people, but as masterpieces in progress, not as abandoned, but as beloved, not as punished, but as prepared. When he said this, I knew the final part of this encounter was about to open like a curtain. The vision would shift, and I would see with his eyes, and that vision would change not only how I saw my life, but how I saw every life touched by suffering. So stay with me, because in the final part, I will share the vision that sealed this revelation forever, a vision of masterpieces in progress, and the answer that finally ended my years of questioning. As Jesus spoke those final words, the atmosphere around us began to shift. The peace I felt grew deeper, and the light surrounding us seemed to grow brighter. I sensed that he was about to show me something that would seal every truth he had revealed. He said, "You have heard with your ears, but now you must see with your eyes." Suddenly I began to see images forming all around me. At first they were faint, like shadows in the distance. Then they grew clearer, and I realized I was seeing the very people whose stories had broken my heart. Sarah, the mother who taught children while fighting illness. Michael, the pastor who lost his home and his position. Maria, the missionary who returned to family pain. One by one, they appeared before me, yet they were not as I had last imagined them. I had seen them in pain. Now I saw them in glory. I had seen them struggling. Now I saw them shining. Sarah, who once appeared weak, now radiated strength that could not be shaken. Her faith had become like a pillar. Michael, who had been rejected, now stood clothed in integrity that glowed like fire. Maria, who had been broken, now overflowed with forgiveness that poured like water over parched ground. I wept as I saw them, because in that moment I realized what Jesus had been saying all along. They were not abandoned children. They were masterpieces in progress. Their struggles had been brushstrokes in a painting I could not yet see. Their trials had been chisels in the hands of a sculptor shaping something eternal. Jesus placed his arm around me and whispered, "Now do you see? You were looking at their circumstances, but I was looking at their character. You were focusing on their pain, but I was focused on their purpose. You were asking why they struggle, but I was celebrating how they shine." I fell to my knees, overwhelmed by the beauty of what I was seeing. For years I had measured God's love by comfort, but now I saw that his love was far deeper. It was a love that was willing to refine, willing to prepare, willing to trust his children with assignments that carried eternal weight. Then he said, "This is why chosen ones struggle the most, because they are trusted the most. I am not punishing them. I am preparing them. I am not withholding blessing. I am building capacity. I am not turning away from them. I am drawing them closer." In that vision, I also saw glimpses of others I did not know by name. Men and women across nations, across generations, who walked through fire and flood, who cried tears in hidden places, who carried burdens unseen by the world. And as I looked at them, I no longer saw victims. I saw victors. I saw testimonies being written. I saw seeds being sown. I saw treasures being formed. Jesus looked at me again and said, "When you see someone walking through hardship, do not pity them, celebrate them. For heaven calls them chosen. The world may see weakness, I see strength. The world may see pain, I see preparation. The world may see loss, I see legacy." Those words pierced me with both conviction and hope. I realized how often I had judged too quickly, how often I had assumed that suffering meant forgotten. But now I knew suffering meant trusted. Jesus then spoke to me about my own life. He said, "The struggles you have faced while representing me were not accidents. They were confirmations. You could not portray me with authority unless you walked through some of what I walked through. I was misunderstood, rejected, betrayed, and crucified. My suffering carried purpose, and so does yours. Every tear you cried was part of your preparation. Every question you asked was part of your equipping. Every battle you fought was part of your authority. You are not simply an actor telling a story. You are a servant living one." Those words released me from years of confusion. The weight of doubt lifted. The fog of questioning cleared. I saw with clarity that my struggles were not signs of God's displeasure, but evidence of his trust. I could rise from that encounter with peace I had never known, with courage I had never felt, with a vision that would never leave me. And now, I speak these words to you. Your struggles are not meaningless. Your pain is not wasted. Your tears are not ignored. They are brushstrokes on the canvas of your destiny. They are notes in the song of your testimony. They are seeds that will bear fruit for eternity. You may not see it yet, but you are a masterpiece in progress. Remember the sacred truths. Pressure is creating preciousness in you. Resistance is forming strength. Brokenness is leading to breakthrough. Desert seasons are teaching you dependency. Isolation is cultivating intimacy. Waiting is carving wisdom. And your testimony will carry transformation for others. This is not theory. This is reality. This is why chosen ones struggle, because God trusts them to carry light where darkness reigns, because God knows their lives will speak louder than words, because God sees in them what the world cannot. If you are listening right now and you feel weary, if you feel like your faith is hanging by a thread, I want you to hear this with your whole heart. You are not being punished. You are being prepared. You are not forgotten. You are favored. You are not abandoned. You are trusted. Do not give up. Do not let the enemy convince you that your story is over. Your story is still being written. And the author of your story does not make mistakes. The chapter you are living through may feel dark, but the ending is filled with light. As this vision came to a close, Jesus looked at me with joy in his eyes and said, "Now you understand. Now you can tell others that their struggles are not signs of my absence, but evidence of my presence. Now you can encourage them that their pain is not wasted. It is woven into purpose. Now you can remind them that their faithfulness in fire is creating testimonies that will shine for generations." I woke from that encounter with peace I had never known before, and I knew that I was meant to share it with you, because perhaps you have been asking the same question I once asked, and now the answer is clear. Chosen ones struggle the most because they are trusted the most. Their struggles are not punishments, but preparations. Their tears are not signs of weakness, but streams of strength. Their waiting is not empty, but pregnant with wisdom. Their testimonies are not only for themselves, but for all who will hear and be changed. So take courage, lift your head, wipe your tears. You are a masterpiece in progress. The world may not understand your struggles, but heaven is cheering for you. Angels watch your perseverance. Saints surround you in encouragement. And your Father smiles with pride as he says, "That one is mine, and I trust them." If this message has touched your heart, share your story in the comments below. Let others know that they are not alone. Subscribe if you want to hear more messages like this, because this is not the end. This is only the beginning of what God is revealing to his chosen ones. And never forget, your struggles are not wasted. They are sacred steps on the path of becoming everything God created you to be. You are chosen, you are trusted, and you are being prepared for glory.